Welcome, welcome, welcome. Woo-hoo. Yeah, welcome. Welcome to BioBites. Yeah, this is the podcast that breaks down big biology topics into bite-sized pieces. I'm your host, Dr. Klein, and today we're going to talk about something fundamental to life, the cell. But trust me, it's way cooler than that. Way cooler than that. So what exactly is a cell? So we're going to divide the cell, talk about two things when it comes to the cell. So think of it as, there's one group called prokaryotic cells. That's like your basic bacteria cell. And then you've got another group called eukaryotic cells. And cells make up everything. They're kind of like the building blocks of a house. So bricks are kind of like the building blocks of a house. The building blocks of life are cells. So we're made up of cells. And so, everything is made up of cells. And in fact, that is one of the characteristics of life, is that it has at least one cell. So there are basically two different types of cells out there. We've got one type that is what we call prokaryotic cells, and we have another type called eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells simply mean pro, meaning before, and then that karya on the end, karyon, means nucleus. So before nucleus is what a prokaryotic cell does. It doesn't have any nuclei. It's kind of weird. On the other side, we've got eukaryotic cells. So eu means true. And so we've got true nuclei, meaning that they have nuclei, okay? And so this includes everything from like fungus to plants and animals. That means us. We have a nucleus, right? In most of our cells, not all of them, but most of our cells have a nuclei in them. And that's really, really cool. And so you need to think of it like a bag, a little microscopic bag. So for prokaryotic cells, super small microscopic bags, way smaller than our cells. And inside it's just like a whole bag of water with just things floating around in it, doing all of its cellular processes. Okay. No nucleus. That's important. Okay. So that's bacteria and all things like bacteria. And so when you get sick, from some kind of bacterial infection, you can say, bacteria. But there are a lot of good bacteria out there, like the stuff that helps us have yogurt and helps allow bread to rise. Those are all good bacteria. In fact, there may be more. We don't actually know because there's like 70 million species of bacteria and alike species. But there are a lot of good bacteria out there and some bacteria that make us get sick. All right, so let's talk about eubacteria. So that's us and animals and plants and fungi again. And so those types of cells have a nucleus. And so remember, a nuclei is simply a little bag on the inside of our cell, or a little container on the inside of our cell that carries our genetic material. So you can think of it kind of like a brain or a library full of the information that makes us us. Okay. So that's a nucleus, right? And so then there are other things in eukaryotic cells that are also important. It's most eukaryotic cells, or all eukaryotic cells, have what's called a plasma membrane. So that's like the exterior part of it, kind of like its skin, okay, on the outside. Plant cells have an extra outer covering called a cell wall, but we're going to keep it pretty basic today and just talk about cells in general, right? So we're not going to talk about chloroplasts, which are also in plants. Those are important too, but we're not going to talk about those today. We're just talking about cells in general. All right, so eukaryotic cells, they've got this plasma membrane, very selective actually about what comes in and leaves the body. All right, we don't want things to come into the cell that cause it harm. And we sometimes need to push things out of the cell that allow other cells to function, like hormones and stuff like that, cell products. Okay. And so the plasma membrane helps regulate that. All right. Next up on our list, we've talked about the nucleus, we've talked about the plasma membrane. There are other organelles as well, like the mitochondria. And if you spent any time in a science class in K through 12, you know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It produces energy for the cell in the form of what we call ATP. So you can think of it as kind of an energy factory, right? Or a power plant. Next up is what we call the ER, or the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, the endoplasmic reticulum, there's two types. There's the rough ER and the smooth ER. The rough ER has little what we call ribosomes on them. And those are all important in the production of proteins. And proteins are all about structure. And so when you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, oh, why do I look this way? Why do I have the eye color or the hair color I have? My hair's falling out, so I've got my hat on so that you can't see that. It's turning gray too. But why do I have the traits that I do have? Well, that's because proteins are being made as a result of translating and transcribing our DNA into these proteins. And that all occurs in the ribosomes, mostly on our rough ER, the endoplasmic reticulum. On the other hand, we also need fats and lipids created, and those are often synthesized on the smooth ER, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So also very important. So the endoplasmic reticulum is really producing a lot of those cell products for us that can be then transported through an organelle called the Golgi apparatus, sometimes called the Golgi body. And it is transported around, allows for things to be transported around the cell. You can kind of think of the Golgi apparatus as kind of like the post office or UPS store or something. And it packages and ships things around the cell or outside of the cell even. So like hormones need to be packaged and sent outside of the cell. Okay. And so the Golgi apparatus helps us with that. Next up on the list of things, I mentioned ribosomes. Ribosomes help make protein. Not going to mention that anymore. There are many others, different structures out there, peroxisomes, and just a lot of different ones. There's vacuoles in plants. Not going to go any deeper than that. Just know that organelles are usually have very specific functions, and they're usually surrounded by a membrane, okay? And for some of those organelles, they may have once been a cell in and of themselves that just got eaten up by another cell. Anyway, that's a really cool story. Ask me about that sometimes. So why should you care? Well, when it comes to medicines and sickness and disease, it makes a big difference to have some kind of understanding how cells work and what they are, right? So cancer is simply uncontrolled cell division, right? I doubt there is anyone in the sound of my voice that hasn't been touched in some way by cancer. Someone you know, somehow you've been touched. Well, this is just cells that have lost the ability to control how fast and when they should divide and specialize themselves. And so that's a cell process. That's a cell problem. Medicines, a lot of the medicines we have out there, antibiotics and stuff like that, treat us at the level of the cell, okay? So super important. Food products, right? I mentioned yogurt and bread. My daughter made some just delicious bread yesterday, and she had to wait for it to rise. Well, why does it do that? Why does bread rise if it's got yeast in it? Well, that's a bacteria, right? And so bacteria is eating the sugars that are in that bread, and the byproduct is CO2. And as a result, bread rises. And that is good to know, right? That's why you need yeast in bread. Yogurt is a product of another type of bacteria, and is important in the production of yeast. So food production, it's important, right? It is part of what it is that we do. M- Meat, a meat product, meats are our muscle cells, right? Okay. So lots of that. When it comes to agriculture, producing that food, if you're a farmer, you got to understand how plant nutrients work at the level of the cell to some degree in order to grow plant products or grow animal products and stuff like that. Environmentally, evolutionarily speaking, all of this occurs at the level of the cell. And so, no matter if you're talking about health or sickness, science, environmental stuff, agriculture, all of this stuff happens at the level of the cell. And so, having some basic understanding of the cell becomes very, very important. And believe me, as a parent, understanding things at the level of the cell when it comes to your children is very helpful, especially when your kiddos aren't feeling very well, or when you have teenagers who are being hammered by hormones. Then you appreciate having some of that knowledge. So let me sum up what we've talked about today. So we talked about the two different types of cells. Prokaryotes, no nucleus. Eukaryotes have a nucleus, right? Prokaryotes are basically bacteria and alike. And then eukaryotes do have a bacteria, okay? Or do have a nucleus, sorry. Anyway, do have a nucleus. That includes animals, plants, fungi, and a group called protists. And we'll talk about those sometime too, because they're really cool. If you ever want something really cool to look up diatom art. Super awesome, very beautiful. Okay, so we've talked about those. We've talked about the organelles. Besides the nucleus and the plasma membrane, we often have these structures inside that have specific function. And we've talked about the reason why we want to understand cells. Cells are dynamic. They have a ton of functions. They are not just a bag of water hanging around inside of our body. They do lots of processes, tons of them every second that you're alive. So that's cells. I hope you enjoyed it. It is awesome. It's only going to get better as we go through all of the different processes that life can provide and do provide on a regular basis. So join us next time as we discuss cellular division. Have a great day. Bye.